It's like at
Yeah.
the time you're like, this is not traumatic. What do you mean it's a traumatic? And then you start to
Yeah.
unpack it and go,
Hey guys,
okay.
welcome to another episode of the Remind podcast. My name is Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. I am joined by David Masterton, and today we are going to be talking about recognizing trauma in hindsight and how traumatic that can be.
Mm,
And the context of
oof.
this is it came up for me. I not long got back from the Philippines where my family and I were serving in a missionary capacity. And I had so many experiences, one being recognizing that for me, who has a worldview and a perspective and an understanding of what healthy dynamics of a relationship are, what healthy home life looks like, what I guess a moral compass can look like, and being exposed to things where people actually had no idea that it wasn't normal or that it wasn't, and I'm like talking about incest and like childhood rape and really like extreme things.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but they weren't experiencing trauma. They were still full of joy and still full of all these things because they didn't know that the things that were happening, like being 13 years old and having your father's child, they just didn't know that that wasn't kind of okay or wasn't morally acceptable. So it was really interesting meeting some people who, when they were older in their life, had an experience or exposure to circumstances that were quite different, and then recognizing that actually what happened to them wasn't okay and it wasn't normal, that's when it became traumatic for them because they had to look back on their life with hindsight and go, my whole childhood, my whole life until this point was actually completely traumatic and completely like I was abused, I was this, I was that. And so it really got me thinking. It got me thinking about this phenomena of when, I see it all the time, not to that extent, but I see it all the time when people are like, yeah, I had a great childhood. No, I grew up in a loving home. But the more they learn and the more their mind is expanded, they'll go, oh my gosh, no, I used to get flogged for this. And this used to happen and this used to happen. And I felt really unsafe a lot of the time. And I felt unseen and unheard. And they start to go, oh my gosh, everything I thought I knew is actually not what I know at all.
Oh, it's a massive one because what's normal? Normal is normal compared to what? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, well, if you grow up and everyone's being treated the same in the environment, then there's your normal. So if your experience is worse than that normal, then that's not good. But
Yeah.
if your childhood is better than the normal, then you should be grateful. But what sets the normal? What sets the norm in the environment, the society, the community?
Yeah.
And I think, when we look at our generation of being raised by our parents, there was a normal. And then our measure was based on whatever that normal is. Were you better or worse than that normal? Then you go back to their generation of when they were growing up. Don't just look at us, at our generation and our childhood. Go back to our parents' childhood. What was the normal there?
Yeah.
And based on what is better than that normal and worse than that normal. And then when we look at these measurements or these metrics, what's the scorecard? Did you have money? Did you have food on the table? Did you have clothes? Like what was the metric, right? A lot of this was sort of like, what would a loving mother do? What would a loving father do?
Yeah.
Well, the metric back it, exactly. Like our parents growing up when their childhood, what was the metric of a good dad? 100%. He would go to work. He would provide the money. He would work on the car. He would make sure the stuff's done around the house when it comes to like the manual labor. Mum would stay home. She would look after all the food. She would provide and clean and do all those things. When it comes to the nurturing, like it was all fairly simple. And now we come to when we were growing up, what was the metric then? And especially when it sort of comes from single income households into double income households, because money's just not worth the same anymore. So single income households were on the decline. And now we go back to us as parents now. What's the scorecard now? Well, between our parents and now, the shift is phenomenal
Yeah.
on what a good parent is.
100%.
So
You make such a good point because it is all about normal. I remember being a kid where it was normal for me to be flogged, like,
yeah,
or to be whatever. And I
yep.
remember being so defensive over that. My most common line was like, well, I got a flogging when I was a kid and I turned out all right. That
Mm,
was just such a default line, except when I looked at my life, I would say that line. I used to cop a flogging and I turned out all right, except I was absolutely destroyed by anxiety. I was completely incapable of trusting anyone. I had no
mm,
self-esteem, no self-worth. I'd been suicidal multiple times.
jeez.
And so when you look at that now, understanding what I know about human development and relationships and all this sort of stuff, I can understand that I needed to unlearn what normal was so that
Mm,
I could give my kids a different normal and rewrite the narrative of normal. Maybe that's what this this could be, rewrite the narrative of normal. Um, because just because something is normal and just because something is common does not make it healthy. And so we either have to make a decision about, do we want to give our kids a normal childhood or do we want to give them a healthy one? And sometimes they are worlds apart.
well, normal is just a propagation of what you know, right? Normal is
Exactly.
just the propagation of what was happening in the past and sort of going,
Yeah.
well, that was normal for me, so I'll make it normal for you. And
Yes.
in a changing landscape, that's dangerous. Because coming
Yes.
back to flogging, like I was hit as a kid and I also did stupid stuff when I was a kid. Like you go back and sort of think, did I deserve it? Well, God, in that reflection, in that normal, hell yeah. It was also part of my thinking. If I do this stupid thing, am I going to get hit? Well, it's worth it, right? Um, and that brings up for me the conforming through what? Conforming through fear, which is what we had, which is called discipline, versus the conforming through understanding and teaching. And so you could have a child that would listen, like, and I've gone from one to the other. My kids would listen to me because they were fearful of me, because I used to smack when they were quite young. And now they talk to me and they listen to me because I listen to them.
Yeah.
And so it's not, they don't listen to me because they have to. They listen to me because they want to, because there's an equal sort of understanding. There's not like an equal power dynamic. While they're a child and I'm a parent and they live under my roof and all of that, there's never going to be an equal power, right? It's just the way it is. That'll change when they're 18, 19 and they're adults and we transition from a child parent into adult child, adult parent relationship. But it's that conforming. So, and then back then, being a good child meant that the metric for a child is, am I going to get smacked? So as long as I don't get smacked, I'm doing a reasonably good job. If I'm not being yelled at, I'm doing a reasonably good job. As opposed to, is my feelings being understood? So as long as I don't get caught doing the stupid stuff, as long as I can keep the stupid stuff to a tolerable limit, I'll process how I need to process, because again, for me, as long as I don't reach that threshold of the smack or the whatever, we're good. But again, go back to our parents. And when they were kids, what was it like then? There was like I heard stories that you get absolutely hit in the classroom with a cane if you did the wrong thing. If you didn't answer a question right, like whack
Yep.
right over the knuckles. And that,
Left-handed.
all right. Okay.
Yeah, they used to smack, yeah, they used to smack them with a cane right if they were caught writing with their left hand because it was abnormal. It was normal to write with your right hand, and if you were left-handed, they used to whack it out of you.
So conformity. So it's
conformity.
like this sort of, if we were to propagate what was normal, it leaves out evolution, or evolution becomes a snail's pace. And what we're
Mm.
being called to do right now is evolve at a rapid rate,
Yeah.
huge rate. So looking at all of that and going, okay, for me, in my past and my childhood, when people would ask me what was my childhood like, great. It was fantastic.
Because it
Because I was
was
told that.
normal.
Because and not only that, I was told that
Yes.
by the people
Yeah.
raising me.
And
You had a
I'm
great childhood.
flogging you. Yes, and I'm flogging you because I love you.
No, well, okay, I didn't have that. I didn't have that bit. That was sort of like, you've really annoyed me. You've done something stupid. Go get the wooden spoon. No, crap. Right? As long as I get my hand in between my bum quick enough and I cry and make a scene, it'll all be over in a couple of seconds. But I was told, you should be grateful because not everyone has this, and you have this, and you have that, and you, and you, and you, and you. Huh, okay, but I still don't feel right. Ah, that's because you are ungrateful, because you are a bad child, because you need to look at what's going on, because you need to be better.
Mm.
Oh, so I was shamed into thinking that. Now, it wasn't a terrible childhood by a long stretch of the imagination, and a substantial bump to what my parents went through. So there was an improvement, absolute improvement. And so on that case, yeah, kudos to my parents. But was it enough to have zero trauma? Far from it. And then suddenly you've got parents who wrap themselves up, and some parents wrap themselves up on, I have this thing where I need to be the best parent out there. Or my entire identity is based on being a good parent. And if that's not reinforced, then all my sacrifice was for nothing. And how dare you take that away from me?
Yeah.
So then suddenly there's this whole, well, where do I get space to realize that maybe there were things in my childhood that were traumatic? It doesn't have to be big T, could be little t. And what if those feelings I had were real? And what if my parents couldn't do too much about it? Because again, not every child knows how to explain exactly what they're going through. And with maybe all the best intentions from the parent, yeah, what you thought you gave them was very different to what they needed. Because maybe, just maybe, as a parent, you give your children everything that you didn't get. Not necessarily exactly what the child needs. And that's okay. As a parent myself, I know that's exactly what's going to happen with my kids. But what I'm not going to do is judge them into the fact that I gave you everything, you need to be grateful, you need to do this, and if you don't feel that way, you're a bad person because you make me feel bad. No, it's going to come at, guess what? I'm not going to give you everything. But I tell you what, when you recognize it, doesn't matter how old you are, I'm there for it. Because we're all learning, we're all evolving, we're all adapting. So, yeah. That's me.
So interesting, isn't it? When was the time that you realized that there were aspects of your childhood that probably weren't healthy or okay? And what was that like for you?
Well, basically it coincided with the healing journey. So when everything, because prior to stopping and taking note of the things that were holding me back, there was a lot of, within me, overuse of logic to deal with the world because there was a complete disconnect from emotion. Now, that as a trait is a narcissistic trait. However, I was labeled a narcissist because of that. And then everything else fitted around it. So part of that was sort of for me, well, if I'm going to wear the label, I may as well enjoy it. And so when the overuse of logic, the inability to really want to drop my walls, when that started to change and my healing journey started with vulnerability and understanding why is it that I over rely on logic, that's when the logic in itself lives in ego a lot of the time. Well, it lives in ego for me. I'm constantly judging. Am I better than this? Am I worse than this? Am I more attractive than this? Am I less attractive than this? Am I richer than this? Am I poorer than this? Am I stronger than this? Am I less? Constantly going. And then from there was aggravation, frustration, and all of these things that happened. When I started to go down the vulnerability path, all of these things started to break away. But part of that healing was actually going back and grabbing a thread that was more recent as to exploring why can't I tell people that I love them outside of certain parameters. And I started pulling that thread, and that thread just kept on going and going and going and going and going until I ended up in my childhood. And some really big emotions started coming up then. And then while I was back there, I started exploring that whole area and then realized that if during that time I felt like shit, that I was guilted into the point that if I felt like shit back then and it wasn't because of somebody else or was being misunderstood or something like that or anything that resembled getting any close to the fact that my parents couldn't help me with this, there would have been an absolute blow up, especially if I talk about it with them. Particularly one parent is what I'm talking about.
Capacity to receive that.
No, they took it as a threat. They took it as you're damaging my reputation. Everything I sacrificed for you was for nothing. And so it's like, okay, but look, I don't think you did a bad job. Don't hear what I'm saying. Well, don't hear what I'm not saying, right? You didn't do a bad job, but what you're wanting me to say is your best job was the best for me. It wasn't. There was a gap. But anytime that gap in my emotions or my feelings, and I can feel it coming up now at the moment, anytime I tried to process that as a kid, it was absolutely smashed down. Smashed. Guilt. Shame. You ungrateful. Bang, 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 bang. And when I close out all those emotions, well, I don't feel the pain anymore. Not on the surface level. There's obviously something deep-seated. But now you're a narcissist. Because I want you to feel. But I want you to feel in these things because your emotions and your love is my currency for my sacrifice that I gave you. Because love equals sacrifice. That's it. For me to love you, I must sacrifice myself. Is that love? Well, it was for them, because maybe they didn't see the fact that there wasn't the sacrifice that they needed. What they needed in their childhood was for their parents to focus on the child. Or maybe it was that whole thing of any time that giving or loving or nurturing came as a sacrifice, so they just propelled the normal. Better than what they had, 100%. So when you start to then crush this down over time, and death by 1,000 cuts when it came to my emotions, you become stonewalled, you become logic, you become a narcissist. Combine that with the fact that I would naturally be okay being in the crap. Right? If I'm in the crap, I'm in the crap. Okay. I'll prefer not to be there, but if I'm going to say no, I'll say no.
Yeah, it's like it's become such a familiar place to be that you're just like, it doesn't really mean anything anymore, whatever.
Yeah. And then the definition of trauma or a traumatic experience is you got to be on a plane that falls out of the sky. You got to be in a car crash where you lose an arm. Like this is like the massive traumatic stuff that's where trauma lives. Okay, now we're sort of seeing trauma in a very different light. So, trauma in hindsight, how did I feel about it? It was brutal. But there wasn't blame for what had happened to me. because I also believe that during all of this, it was me being forged in the fire. I was both the steel being manipulated and I was the hammer at the same time. So I didn't sort of come here to be clearly put in a sort of, coddled and babied, and my experience is around that forging and that sharpening. But what it did lead me to realize as well is that if I can understand this and see this, and I want to have a relationship with my parents, then the relationship now has to change.
Yeah.
I'm no longer accountable for this. And if they want to have a relationship with me and they want to know how I am and I'm healing, well, then you want to hear what's going on, right? Oh, no, because again, they haven't changed. Because any recourse or any discussion back into what I'm going through has to be censored because their triggers are still as raw as ever. So, and that led to no more relationship. So, but again, I understand because when I look at that parent, I see them as the person that they were, treated by their parents the way they were. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Doesn't mean I'm going to exist in their reality anymore. But for me, it's about going, okay, what's happened has happened. It's going to be, how am I going to take control? Not control. How am I going to take accountability for what I'm doing and how I'm going to create the environment for my kids that I'm not going to get it right? And I've said to them, chances are there's going to be stuff that I've done that you're going to see in the future, which I really will have messed things up. And it's not about me being perfect. It's when you identify it, you having the bravery, the courage, the ability to come to me, and safety, because that's what I'm building, right? To come to me and go, hey, this thing that you did back then is still bothering me. Okay, let's work through it. And I have that at the moment with my daughter. She still goes back to the time that I left her mother because she was about 4 or 5 at the time. And it's like, okay, I can tell you all the reasons why I did it. Doesn't make an absolute inch of difference. It's more about allowing her to explore what it felt like when that happened and almost removing my justification out of it completely. Because it doesn't matter how I justify it, it's done. It was done over 8 years ago. There's no going back to change that. My justification doesn't make her feel any better. And so when I allow myself to not make it about me and to talk to her about it, I'm also setting, as you said, this safety. So if something really does come up that makes her feel nervous about something that I've said, done, or whatever, she'll be able to still bring it up through that. And same with my son.
Huge.
That's what I'm working towards anyway.
There's so much in that. I would be really curious. I think this is a good place to end this episode, but I want to end this episode because I want to come back and take off another little piece and talk about that separately. So I'm really curious for those who have listened to this, what revelations, what realizations have you had about how you related to your own childhood, about how your relationship with parents and your capacity to be able to communicate and convey that to them, would it be safe? Would it be unsafe? Where do you still have to abandon yourself in order to be able to appease and please? And really, really curious, where I would like to take the conversation in our next episode is more focused around the things that we've experienced in our childhood that at the time did not seem traumatic, but the trauma actually was in realizing the things that we experienced. And I think that's a really nuanced topic that I've never heard. I've never heard a podcast episode about it. I've never read anything about it. I've never seen anyone speaking about this, because it's one thing for us to acknowledge the things that we experienced in our childhood, but I'm really curious about exploring the traumatic experience of revelation and how earth-shattering and reality shifting that can be, and how we actually move through and navigate that. So this is a really, really nice entree.
On-ramp. Yeah, on-ramp.
entree to a really juicy topic. So let's make this part one. And I really genuinely want to hear from people, because Dave has shared stuff that is so relatable. And everything that you said, Dave, I could relate to what you were saying. And I was like, man, yes. And I was having my own little realizations and revelations, and it was very personable. So I'm really curious for our listeners, what did it bring up for you, and what did you resonate with and relate to? And then tune in for our next episode, where we actually look a little closer at that moment of revelation and realization. And it's almost like you can hear the glass shattering as you smash through that like wall of reality. So we'll come back next episode. Hopefully click subscribe if you haven't already. And if you could also do us a favor and actually rate the show, it helps people to find us. That'll be amazing. And we'll see you again in our next episode.